Jane Castle, congratulations on this film, When the Camera Stopped Rolling. It's a very beautiful, moving film that you've made about your remarkable mother, Lillias Fraser, and about your relationship with her. Can you first tell us, in a nutshell, Lillias Fraser, give us her biography.
Thank you. Well, Lillias was born in 1930, made her first film in 1957, shot single-handedly up in Queensland, and was one of the first films actually shot by a woman in Australia. She wanted to become a cinematographer, but the blokes in charge said she wouldn't be strong enough to carry the cameras, despite ABC screening her film nightly before the news. So she became a director, and teamed up with my dad, who became the front man, because, of course, you couldn't really be an independent woman filmmaker back then. And she went on to make over 40 films, including what we believe is the first land rights film in Australia, a film called This Is Their Land. And, she was just full of enthusiasm and get up and go. And she wasn't precious. She made a lot of industrial documentaries. And then in the later years of her life started to make more personal films. And she was pretty much an unwitting proto-feminist trailblazer. She had no idea she was making history. She was very kind of understated and just loved making movies, loved being out on location. And then, of course, I came along, and, well, that's another story, but that's Lillias in a nutshell.
The film certainly makes a very strong case of the importance your mother had in the evolution of filmmaking in Australia. Apart from exploring your relationship with her, was one of the purposes of the film to serve as a reminder of the contribution of this woman that, quite frankly, Jane Castle, otherwise would have been buried in history.
Yes. Yeah, look, no one really has heard of her outside of this small documentary scene in Australia. And her films just would have been languishing in the archives, gathering dust, if I hadn't, made this film about her. And, that's a story we keep seeing repeated about so many women who, have been hidden, often under the men who are kind of take the limelight. And so there's been this long tradition now, it's getting quite well established, of bringing these women up from the archives and, giving them their place in history. So, I didn't do it for that purpose, but I'm actually so glad that it has been done, and, she can put her, stake in the sand or line in the sand, and there she is in history, and people can go and refer to her and kind of put her in context with the whole history of Australian cinema.
Very keen to know at what point you decided to make this film, because she died in 2004, and just want to know what the trigger was to make you decide, look, this film needs to be made both for myself and for the audience.
Well, look, to let you in on a bit of a secret, I never actually wanted to make a film about her. I kind of had the shits with it. It's pretty hard for women to juggle motherhood and having a career. And, often the career took precedence. So I actually wanted to make a completely different film. It was a film about death. I was on this kind of mission to, I don't know, I wanted to figure out from a spiritual perspective and philosophical perspective what happened when you die. And my producer, Pat Fisk, wisely said, well, why don't you just go off and do some writing? So I did, and the story of Mum's death kind of fell onto the page, and actually that's what people were interested in, the funding bodies, the donors. It was a no-brainer. Hello, my mother was a pioneer of Australian cinema. I followed in her footsteps and became a cinematographer. We had this kind of fractious relationship. And it's really, so on some level, I feel like the film always knew it wanted to come into being, and it just figured out this particular way of making it happen and grabbing me and making me its slave for, over 10 years. So I feel like I don't have that much, it wasn't me that was driving it, this, I'm going to make a film about my mother. I just feel like I landed there, by accident almost.
I presume that at the start point of the making of this film, you had arrived at some understanding of your relationship with your mother. I'm very eager to know if that process continued during the making of the film and the assembling of all the archival footage and so forth. Or did you have a fixed idea of what it was and then just make the film?
No, definitely the former. So, in fact, yeah, I'd been kind of working on our relationship for a number of years, but there was always more to do. So the making of the film was a very iterative process, and I didn't actually realize it would be so much about our relationship, when we started. And I learned so much about her, like having to go into the archives and dig up and understand, what her history involved. And it was, I was doing personal therapy at the same time. So they kind of went parallel. And the level of understanding I have now after going through that process, and the level of acceptance and forgiveness, of her, but also of my part in our relationship, has been huge. So, I didn't do it, as a therapeutic process, but that was one of the benefits of it.
Even having said that, Jane Castle, are you at peace now? Have you come to a point of forgiveness and reconciliation given the trauma that your relationship with your mother put you through?
Yeah, I'd say I'm almost there. Like I'm probably like 90, 95, 99% there. There's a little bit more work to do, but particularly around my dad and other things that happen in the family. But yeah, I do. I found a photo of her the other day, of when she was looks like she's about 17 or 18, and there's this look in her eye of such vulnerability, and it's just like, oh, I get it. I get why you made those choices and why you did what you did, and there's just so much more understanding and compassion, and especially, when we get older, and you kind of take in the knocks of life on as you go, and you're like, oh yeah, I'm not so hot too, and yeah, there is a lot more compassion and understanding now, and we're pretty. Look, in a way, the film helped us to connect. The ending of the film, particularly that reframing of her death, I do feel like we are more connected now than we were.
I did want to ask you specifically about that, the way you cover her death. It's not a shocking sensationalist coverage with newspaper headlines and so on. You almost turn it into a form of poetry. I guess some people might criticize you for having taken that approach, but I'm seeing that it was an expression of how you genuinely felt.
Yeah, it's interesting that you pick up on that, because as you know, her death kind of starts the film and ends the film, and the first way it's portrayed is much more kind of literal and dramatic, and just without that kind of spiritual aspect. And then, yeah, I don't really know. It wasn't planned that way to come about, but it's part of me. Like, I've got a personal spirituality like a lot of people do, and I don't go around kind of talking about it, but I did feel there was something more than just, the body that dies when she died, and there were all these synchronicities around it that were so strange. And I guess, yeah, I might be criticized for that, but I think it's more like an offering for audiences. They can enter into that if they want, or they can kind of choose to stay with the first way, earlier in the film, the way that I portrayed her death then. And yeah, it might be too much, might be too like woo-woo for people. But it felt like I still feel moved when I see that last scene, even though we put it together, because the footage is just off the planet, and the music, and Ray Thomas, the editor, did such an amazing job. And yeah, for me, I love it. So I'm just speaking for myself.
Well, it certainly does open up a conversation for people who watch the film with their relationship, not just with their mothers, but with their fathers and with other people who are close to them. The coverage of alcoholism and depression and suicide, I think, speaks to all of us about the destructive nature of these afflictions, often countered by the love that is also in a relationship. So I just wanted to make that comment about, I think that you've successfully transmitted your emotional journey through the film to anyone who sees it. So congratulations there. Can you quickly tell us about this remarkable personal archive that your mother had, not just with film, but with all these, what were they, diary entries, letters? Tell us a bit about that resource that you had that must have been very rare for somebody growing up in that period.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a luxury that we don't have these days with everything going digital, and in a way, I guess it was more normal back then. But yeah, I just found all this stuff. I just kept digging through, and of course, as a filmmaker, we had all her films, and I mean, you pretty much see everything there. So it might feel like that there's this massive trove, but we were scraping the barrel, and pretty much every frame of her or letter is in the film. And I don't know, they must have had film crews around the home, when they're making films. So there's a little bit of home movie footage, but not so much. We've pretty much used everything, almost everything. But the letters, yeah, that was amazing, because they'd just been up in my attic in a box, and same with my dad's. And so while I was making the film, it wasn't before, it was like during the making, I was like, it was this race against time to try to get to the bottom of the archives before we had to finish the film. And I kept coming up with these gold nuggets, and it really helped me to understand my parents' relationship. Like, why were they together? And I found out all this stuff. And yes, a lot of the secrets got exposed. And the other great thing, like, my mum actually didn't keep anything of her written material, but my dad kept the letters she had written to him. And so she didn't have any of his letters, but he actually kept kind of carbon copies of his own letters. So thankfully we had some material from him as well, which he had kept. So it was just a few kind of chance, lucky, incidences that meant that we had all this material, but it was a treasure trove. It was, I mean, we were actually overwhelmed with all the industrial films, and choosing between them, these magic nuggets from the past was quite difficult.
Can you just tell us a bit about the huge roster of people who you thank at the end of the film in the credits? It looks like the credit list that you see at the end of movies for the digital artists that took part in the film. You thank hundreds of people. Jane Castle, can you just tell us a bit about that and about how you assembled the finance for this independent documentary?
Yeah. Well, even though it's a very personal film, it was actually made by a cast of thousands. So many people helped along the way. We had fundraisers back in 2014. We had a trivia night at the Pato RSL, and we had a dance party. We had auctions, just begging people. We had people sending out emails to everyone in the film industry asking them to donate. So we had a massive crowdfunding campaign for this film, and I think that makes up probably about a third of the budget. And we got some funding from Screen Australia and Screen New South Wales. But the rest we had to kind of cobble together. And in fact, we're still fundraising to try to pay for help to get the film out there, into communities. But, so many people, they've also helped in other ways. Like I shared the film a lot in the making. We had feedback screenings and I'd send the script out. And people would just like say, that word just doesn't feel right. And there's something missing here and something missing there. And so many people gave those comments. And I was like a sponge because I was inexperienced. This is my first feature documentary. And I would take any advice I could get. And so you can actually see there's quite a few script editors and script consultants too. That's because a lot of people spent a lot of time with me going through the script and helping me to hone it. And so it really did literally, as you can see, take a village to make this film.
Can I just ask a quick question just about you? Because you say how you were quite famous cinematographer, making music videos, making films. You then say you decided to stop that to become an artist. Now, I know that if you're a cinematographer making music videos, that's a very good way to make a living. To say that, and then I became an artist, well, not so much. Jane Castle, did you deliberately make a decision to turn your back on a lucrative lifestyle to opt for a leaner, more artistic-driven life? It's a terribly personal question, but it's there in the film. So I really am very interested in knowing if you did, in fact, do that.
Yes, I did. But, I did make, I worked in America for 4 years. And I worked with Prince and U2. So I got paid pretty well. And so by the time I was 26, I'd actually put a deposit down on a house. I had property in Sydney, which is amazing. So, it wasn't always the most ethical work I did, and there are a few moral regrets around that, especially, the B-grade horror film.
Leprechaun 2, let's say it.
Let's say it out loud, Leprechaun 2. So I did have some buffer in order to make that switch, but also I just found filmmaking just in that kind of industry. I know some people can cope well with it, but I'm kind of a bit of a sensitive soul, and I found it really grueling, the hours and also the stress that I was put under to, deliver top, quality material. The stakes are really high, and you're only as good as your next job. So yeah, I did. I went to art school, and then I became an environmental campaigner for about 8 years, and so that was paid, but a lot less than in the film industry. But it got me by, and I guess they're life choices, and I was just lucky to be able to have the financial flexibility to do that.
Is it rude of me to ask how you make a living now? Well, it is a rude question.
No, it's not. Well, no, it's not rude, but actually I'm training to become a psychotherapist at the moment. So, I'm starting up a business. I've got a few clients, and hopefully, making this transition into hopefully what will be my third and final career. It's a great job for old people. You get to sit down, and your age and your wisdom is an asset. So, and I want to get away from screens. I want to have a little bit more human contact, because I've spent my life, either looking down a viewfinder or, looking at the screen editing. So bit of a sea change.
Jane Castle, thank you very much for that. That was sensational. I have one supplementary question that is unrelated to the film that
yeah.
I'm compelled to ask anyone I interview. And that is simply for your view on, the Will Smith, Chris Rock incident at the Oscars.
Wow, it's a great question, because it's a complex issue. I mean, so there's the bullying aspect of Chris Rock, there's the violence aspect of Will Smith, then there's the kind of racist aspect of how white culture might be framing this. it's just so complicated. And I mean, I think the bottom line is violence is no go. No matter what happens, you got to use your words. You know how they say to kids, use your words. But, you know, I guess it's good it's come out, because it's a bit like my film. You know, I talk about these taboo issues, and it means that we all get to talk about this stuff and hopefully, you know, grow from it and learn and do better next time.